Good morning. Thank you for getting up bright and early and joining us here for the Patient and Public Attitudes Toward Gene Therapy Workshop. I'm Dina Ladd. I'm the Executive Director for Missouri Cures. We are an advocacy education group in Missouri. We work to promote and protect medical research in the state. We will begin this morning's discussion addressing exciting patient and public attitudes toward gene therapy and examine gaps in awareness and understanding as well as ideas on tools to fill them going forward. We will then explore case studies on how industry can successfully partner with the patient communities they serve and how the patient perspectives can be integrated into clinical research and educational programs. And in the final part of the workshop, we'll discuss how these meetings are organized and the systematic approach they provide to ensure that patients' experiences, perspectives and needs and priorities are meaningfully incorporated into drug development and evaluation. So I'm going to ask the first panel to come up and take over here. We've got Michelle Berg. She's the Vice President of Patient Affairs and Community Engagement for Abeona Therapeutics, and we have Susan Sikora, who's the Program Director for the ARM Foundation.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for getting up early to be here and be part of the workshop. As Dina said, my name is Michelle Berg. I get to serve as the Vice President of Patient Affairs and Community Engagement for Abeona Therapeutics. And this is a very important topic. It's something that's very near and dear to the work that we do, and specifically to the department that I lead. So I think before I get into some of the experiences, some of the things that I've noted in the last several years in this particular role, I think it's important just to kind of set the stage of the specific lens with which I'm looking through. And so Abeona is a small organization. We are still under 100, but we're growing. We're nimble, we're agile, we move swiftly, intelligently, but we are also a public company. And currently we're very focused on development of potential gene and cell therapies for rare diseases, and specifically those that impact pediatric population. And right now our programs are in the preclinical through clinical stages. We do also have multiple sites around the world. So you add all of those things up, I like to say that it's not a complaint, but it is a truth that these things, when you stack them all on top of one another, are quite challenging. And I won't say that it's impossible, but as I said, it is challenging. And so navigating that is something that we need to figure out how to do. And certainly explaining, understanding the perceptions of the public as well as the communities that we're aiming to serve is quite critical. So at this point, I like to think of the gene therapy bucket. And what I mean by that, we've come a good distance, but at this point, gene therapy, in and amongst the public perception and oftentimes in and amongst patient communities, is just that. It's just a big bucket. We know that there are nuances, that there are different technologies for delivery. There's in vivo, ex vivo, there's different viruses, there's non-viral. And then you get into the actual delivery to the body. But at this point, I think there's still a lot of confusion or just a lot of lack of understanding, discernment maybe, for these nuances in and amongst the public and certainly in and amongst the patient communities that we're, again, all working to serve. And so I think that's something that needs to be teased out, but it is definitely, as I said, something to be aware of and something to be considering. But the point with that is that with news, with information about gene therapy, there is still a positive article or positive news for a company in gene therapy. In this case, tends to rise. It's a rising tide that floats all boats. But in the converse, I think that a negative or a challenge could have that same impact, regardless of if there is a differentiation. So I hope that makes sense. But that's what I mean by the gene therapy bucket. And so some of the things that I've heard from patient communities and then certainly the public is just there's a lot of confusion or just a lot of maybe just confusion is probably the best word for it, just around the nomenclature. So, what are we calling things? It's a gene medicine, gene therapy, gene, or recombinant DNA technology. I mean, just all of these different things. We understand what we're talking about. We all know. But when you get outside of this space, this area, it is very confusing. It's very daunting. And that's just the terminology. And then when you go to the definitions, that too is quite overwhelming. And so we need to think about the consistency with which that we are utilizing our terms and how we're defining things so that we're able to reduce that noise and confusion for those that are just not in this realm, in this space. And I think that's something that we really do need to consider. And I know that Susan will have some comments on that as well. And certainly, like everything, there's just a spectrum of comprehension. It was really interesting. I came from Aldevron previously and co-hosted an event there last April where we brought in Mark Kay from Stanford and some others to speak. And it was a gathering of folks just, from the general public. No scientific background, no even medical background. There were also some students and a handful of faculty from some of the local universities. But it was really interesting when Dr. Kay gave an overview of gene therapy and kept it very, what I would consider, and I think what he would consider, very base, very simple, very straightforward. It was really interesting, the significant number of questions that he got, and just really the variability of the questions. And so I think there's, again, opportunity for us to consider how we're talking about this and what we're doing to enable people to utilize the right terminology and to ask proper questions. And certainly there's concern and question over utilizing delivery through viruses. I think, at first blush, many in just the general public are a little taken aback, like, what do you mean you're utilizing a virus? And I think how we explain that is really, really important. And certainly, anytime you're talking about making modifications or delivering DNA, this is our normal. This is something that we know. We've been talking about this for decades. However, when you get outside and you get into the public, that can be something that, again, kind of takes a person to step back. And then from the patient community, we see a spectrum of what I would consider expectations. And so you've got those that are willing and wanting to just stand back and watch, let's see. They are at that level of savvy that they understand we have to figure out dose, we have to figure out duration. And then you have those on the other end. And again, looking at the populations that we're aiming to serve, pediatric populations, these are very devastating diseases that we happen to be focused on. And with that can sometimes come an elevated expectation. You hear the word cure, and I think that's very, very, that's an area we have to be very cautious in, of course. So that's just my perspective. Those are the things that I've heard, but I think that Susan's going to have some really great information and concrete data coming out of some of the things that she's been working on. So thank you.
Okay. So, hi, my name is Susan Sikora. I'm the program director for the ARM Foundation for Cell and Gene Medicine. We're a relatively new organization. We just formed our board in January. And so I thought before I go into this topic, I would just give you a very quick introduction of the foundation. This is our mission. We're really designed to do education. That's our purpose. We're a sister organization of ARM, who's hosting this meeting, obviously. And the organization was founded really to take on the educational initiatives. So our mission is here, designed to be an educational and information catalyst on issues that are fundamental to the sector. But we also want to help, get to where we need to ensure access to these medications. And part of that is making sure that our audiences understand what we're talking about. This is just a snapshot slide of where the ARM Foundation plays and where ARM plays. Obviously, primarily ARM is a policy and advocacy organization, a 501c4, and the foundation is a 501c3, and we're focused on education again. But there's obviously some overlap between the organizations, and we're taking that on a case-by-case basis of who kind of leads on what initiatives. These are our board members. You may recognize some of the leaders of your own organizations, but a very impressive and diverse board that's guiding this group. Janet Lambert is actually here. She's on the board of the foundation. So these are our initial projects. We're taking on 3 kind of signature or flagship programs in our first year. The first is what we're calling a gene medicine education program, which has just been branded. So I'm excited to share with you the branding that's only a week old. So you're to see the first spot, the first side of it. But it's a program that's grounded in market research. It is designed to engage stakeholders to really begin that adoption process, accepting what gene medicine is and what it's about and what it's not. Second is an economic impact project to quantify and educate stakeholders about the societal value of cell and gene therapies. And the third is really helping to build the infrastructure that's needed for successful launch of these products. This is our new tagline that you're going to be seeing a lot if you're following the foundation. It's the official title of our gene, cell, and medicine education program. It's called Healing Genes, which is a double entendre. Healing, of course, is a verb and an adjective. And our tagline is Transforming Medicine, Changing Lives. So this will be on everything you see related to this program in both print and digital. And we're really pleased with it. Our steering committee helped to come up with that. This is a look at our steering committee, and I just want to acknowledge Max Bronstein, who's in the audience today. He's our co-chair of our steering committee. If you're interested in joining and helping guide our efforts, we would welcome you. So please see me after this meeting. One of the first things we did in order to make this an evidence-based outreach is conduct some market research. So the very first thing we did was take a lay of the land and do some secondary research and understand what's already been said and what we know. And then we embarked upon some primary research. But the goals were largely just to understand public and patient caregiver perceptions about gene medicine, their attitudes and likelihood to participate in clinical trials, what were some of the obstacles, and identify the gaps. What do we need to fill in terms of information and how do we talk about it? In the meantime, we did that secondary research just to begin to inform our programming and our strategy and our shape our messages, and to really update our audit of what educational resources were already available. So we only have a very short amount of time today, so I'm going to really hit the highlights. But we are having a roundtable today in this room at 2:30, where we're going to go into a deeper dive on the market research and what the foundation is doing and what we're planning for next year. And we really want your input. We want you to be involved in that process, so please join us if you're free. So the secondary market research was conducted by an organization called Versta Research. And they, as I said, reviewed some recent and current studies that measured U.S. public opinion. And these are some of the surveys and studies and publications that they looked at. So it was a very thorough analysis. And what we found from the secondary research is much of what Michelle has said, what you're hearing and kind of know. But the public is not yet aware of this topic. And I talk to our industry partners on a regular basis. And some of them will say, you have to be living under a rock to not know what gene editing is. Not at my family reunion. I mean, people ask me what I've been doing, what I've been working on, and I talk about some of this stuff, and they look at me like I have 3 heads. So they don't know, they don't understand. And to Michelle's point, they are confused. There's so much complexity. There's terms within terms, right? So we have to do, this is important work that we need to do to get society ready to have this conversation. And I have a slide at the very end that talks about our job ahead, which is moving people from not only ground zero to, but below that, really, because sometimes they have a negative perception of cell and gene medicine. It's a little scary for them. It's intimidating. It's overwhelming. So to move them along that spectrum to not only awareness and acceptance, but advocacy, that's a huge job, and it's up to us. So they're not yet aware of the topic. Despite their concerns, though, we found that they will support gene medicine to fix diseases and to lower risk of disease. They don't support gene medicine to enhance or improve traits. Prenatal gene medicine crosses the line for many people, and supporting it even for disease prevention. Religious people tend to oppose gene medicine, but not in a very convicted way. They're not really able to articulate why they have an issue with it. And they're saying, maybe not for me, but for others it's fine. So that's an interesting area to dive into. But again, education and information are key. Accurate knowledge and information strongly boosts support for gene medicine, which sounds like you're stating the obvious, but it's really not. There was one very important survey that was in the University of Wisconsin-Madison camp, and they said that one of the biggest concerns of people is the ability to make an informed decision. We can equip them to make an informed decision. We have all the information we need. We just have to communicate it in the most digestible, compelling way. So some of the implications of these research findings for us. We need to use names of diseases and focus on the need to fix those diseases. Very important. We need to avoid certain words, right? There's no reason for us to talk about pre-birth engineering and embryos and fetuses. If we don't need to talk about it, let's not, because it conjures up negative feelings and people begin to shut down. We need to leverage the idea of all of our exciting medical breakthroughs. We have to talk about this as transforming medicine, and get people excited about it by telling them why we're excited about it and begin to push those positive stories into the environment. We need to document and anticipate and prepare for some of these negative reactions. So there's a series of questions we need to ask ourselves, and we began to address some of those things in the new market research that we did. So earlier this year in the spring, we focused on qualitative interviews. So we had 45-minute interviews with members of the general public. If you're interested in the screening process, I'm happy to talk to you more about it. But we figured that most of the work that's been done to date was all surveys, right, questionnaires. And we felt like people didn't even understand what they were being asked. The terminology is so confusing. So we wanted the opportunity to really have a dialogue with them to understand what they understood and what they didn't, and have an opportunity to explain some of the questioning. So that's what we did earlier in the spring. Some of the key insights were, some of it repeats what we learned in the secondary research, but there's some new insights as well. The public does not yet see anything fundamentally wrong with gene medicine. They're overall supportive, open to the idea and the potential benefits. But unlike other medical and genetic technologies, gene medicine is not yet touching some of the core values among the public that trigger those negative reactions. So this was reassuring. It was encouraging. It's we're not going up against really negative reactions. Stem cell research, vaccines, GMOs, those are a different bucket. So we're not there. But as Michelle said, one or two things go terribly wrong, and because we're so new, that could bring the whole ship down. Interviews with people opposed to gene medicine suggest there are potential danger areas, again, that careful messaging can help us neutralize. So, and that's what you see here, that people may use this medicine to play God. They're tinkering with how humans are created. Another big one is that gene medicine is driven by greed of pharmaceutical companies. So it's critically important for us to focus on our patient centricity, how much we care about the patient, how this is all for the patient, and making sure their experience from beginning to end in clinical trials all the way to trying new therapies is a positive one, if in whatever we can control. Almost out of time, so I will tell you that there are great early suggestions for messaging, and these will be available to you. We'll also talk about these in detail at 2:30 during the roundtable. What to focus on, how to describe it, what to highlight, what terminology to avoid, and to ensure that some messaging is perhaps contextualized within religious teachings for those who might be opposed just based upon their religion. So what's next? We're going to do interviews with patients and caregivers next. That's coming up in this fourth quarter. We're going to do a full quantitative survey, interviewing 500 to 800 members of the public and patients and caregivers. And this was the slide I referred to earlier about our job ahead. So, we're even kind of below here, right? In some cases, and we need to get all the way over there. And that takes a lot of touch points, right? It's the typical formula of reach and frequency. We have to do this. We have to invest in this. It's the only way we'll succeed. Thank you.
I didn't know if you were doing Q&A. That's what I was thinking too. Oh, we're happy to. We can do it at the end. Okay, that'd be great. That would be great. Okay, so our next panel is successful partnerships between industry and patient organizations. Amy Fisher. Okay, so you know what? Let me just introduce you all, and then whoever, because you all know the order you're in. Amy Fisher, patient advocacy lead for Spark Therapeutics. Kristen Smedley, president and co-founder of Curing Retinal Blindness Foundation. And Kimberly Trant, director, head of patient advocacy and engagement for Venture. Can you? Yes. Therapeutics. So which one of you would like to go first? Okay, perfect.
They're there. Good morning. I am actually very happy that we filled up the room at least this much this early. It's really a privilege to be here today. My name is Kimberly Trant, and I'm the head of our patient advocacy and engagement department at Audentes Therapeutics. Today I'm going to share with you our approach to patient advocacy and engagement at our company, and then provide a little bit of a case study of how we've done so with our MTM program. MTM is one of the conditions we serve. So before I begin, you may be wondering, who is Audentes Therapeutics? Audentes is a clinical stage gene therapy company based out of San Francisco. We're developing gene therapy products for life-threatening rare conditions where there are little to no treatment options. We actually have our own manufacturing facility in South San Francisco. And Audentes, we see the patient community as our partners, our teachers, and our collaborators. And we really strive to integrate their perspective into the development process from start to finish. Well, how do we aim to do that? Firstly, the objective at Audentes and the patient advocacy and engagement department is to really integrate. That word integrate is key. Integrate the perspective of the patient community into our work. We do this by effectively engaging with patients, families of patients, as well as patient leaders, in order to eventually deliver meaningful gene therapy development programs, as well as education and resources for the patient community. So what is our approach to patient advocacy and engagement? Well, first of all, we're founded by the principles of trust and respect. It's really at the foundation of all of the work and interactions that we have with the patient community. We really believe in actively listening to the patients and families that we have the honor to speak with. We gather their insights, and then in patient advocacy in our department, we advocate to the rest of our company their perspectives. We strive to build collaborative, respectful relationships with the patient community that are guided by mutual objectives. This work allows us to really take the perspective of the patient community and weave it into the fabric of our work. In fact, in our decision-making process, we like to ask ourselves, what effect is this going to have on the patient? What effect is this going to have on the family? It's really important that we ask ourselves those questions. The photo that you see here is of our CMO, Suyash Prasad, interviewing a family affected by MTM, the condition I'm going to talk to you about today and provide a case study of. They've got a young boy, Cooper, that has MTM, and he's actually got a twin sister, Lily, who's unaffected. They're both 8 years old, and we had the great privilege to have them at an all-company meeting. And this was Suyash interviewing them on stage. We don't just have patients and families at some meetings. Really, it's almost all of our company meetings that we have a patient, a family member, or a patient leader from the community come to speak with our employees. We think that that's very important to our work. In fact, we also have quarterly events at both campuses. I had mentioned that we have a manufacturing facility. We also have an office in downtown San Francisco. So you can't get everybody together at once all the time, but when we do have the privilege to have a patient or a patient leader or a family member in town with us to speak with our employees, we actually do a little roadshow. We go to both campuses, and the employees love it. And we really like being able to have that opportunity to provide that education to them. So I've mentioned quite a few times gathering insights, and I know insights is sometimes kind of a catchphrase, but there's a lot of ways that we gather insights from the patient community. These are with meetings with patients, families, and sometimes these are more formal focus groups or advisory meetings. Sometimes they're more informal, like the photo that I just showed you where we're learning from them. We also partner with the patient organizations globally across all the conditions that we serve. And it's not just my department in patient advocacy that engages in the meetings with these patient leaders and these patient organizations. Depending on the topic, we sometimes have people from our cross-functional teams, whether that be regulatory, clinical operations, development, med affairs, all in depending on the topic to be able to engage with and learn and understand the perspective of the patient leaders. We also believe in not just getting input once, but to continuously get input from the patient community. One of the things that we've started to do are some really informal surveys depending on the topic. Talking about gene therapy today, we sent out a very informal survey asking the patient community, what do you want to know about gene therapy? It's kind of a wide open question, but we were really curious to see what we get, and it really yielded some very key insights for us. So gathering insights is important, but what we actually do with them is critical. So as I mentioned, we really take these insights, we advocate them within the company, and then we integrate them into our clinical development plans. That's what I'm going to provide you an example of. We also make sure that the education, resources, whatever programs that we roll out, that they're not just what we think people need, that it's what they've told us they need, and it's aligned with what they want. We also develop informative communications and updates to the patient community. An example of that is we've started instituting a process by which if there's a major news release, a key milestone, for example, there's with the MTM program, we're hitting a news milestone this week with some interim data. And so what do we do with that? Well, the patient community doesn't want to just read a press release. That doesn't mean anything to them. They don't know what the significance of the words in there are. So we take that and we translate it per se into more patient-friendly language, try to tell them what we think is important, provide them some context as to what isn't in the press release, like a glossary. And we also have started to translate those in up to 5 different languages at a time. And that's the standard. And why do we do that? Because they asked for it. And we're just really happy to be able to provide that service for them. We are truly grateful for the patient organizations who continually engage with us and provide us this feedback. We strive to provide timely and transparent communications with them. It's not always easy to be transparent because you can't always say everything that you want to because it might not be public information. But that's okay. We just tell them that we can't and why we can't. And that seems to build more respect and trust within our relationships. We're always open to hearing their input, even though when it's what we don't necessarily want to hear or what we think we're going to hear. It's a little hard to receive sometimes, but it is so welcome. And we always tell them that we want to hear their opinion. Even if we don't like it, we want to hear it so that we can change. We also, as I mentioned, have formalized meetings with the patient leaders. And again, it's not just patient advocacy that goes to these meetings. My colleagues from our other departments, they come in, they speak with them, they provide information, they answer their questions. It's really great because our vice president of Med Affairs or our CMO can answer questions a lot better about the medical data that's being presented at a meeting, for example, than I can. So we like to be able to provide that to the patient leaders. We also like to mirror the questions that we're asking physicians and not just ask physicians and healthcare providers, all due respect, but we want to hear from the patients and the families and see what they think. And so sometimes it's really cool to be able to ask the same question to both groups and see where there's some variance. The picture that you see on this slide is a picture of the 5 patient advocacy organizations that we partner with globally. 3 of these are based in the US. 1 is in Germany, 1 is in the UK, and this picture was taken in our San Francisco office when they came to visit with us for a 2-day summit, and they spent a lot of time with us to talk about a lot of key issues, and we really learned a lot from them in that meeting. So again, we are truly, truly grateful to these patient leaders, to the patient organizations, for all the key insights that they provide us and their time and their input, their honest input. We truly appreciate that. So at Audentis, we also believe that it's not just about what we do, it's about how we do it. The patient experience that we provide is critical. And what do I mean when I say patient experience? Because that could mean a lot of different things. Patient experience is the way we're defining it here for this purpose. It's the feelings that you provoke within another individual when you communicate or interact with them. And at Audentis, we strive to make sure that our employees and our affiliates who work with patients and families really strive to be aware of how they're interacting with patients and families and what feelings they're provoking with them during those interactions. So what's our desired patient experience? We really want patients and families to feel that they're respected, that they're important, that we're actually listening to them, and that they're our priority. And we want them to feel that we at Audentis are kind, empathetic, and that we truly care about their situation, because we really do. Maya Angelou summed it up best when she said, "People may forget what you said, they might forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel." Think about that for a moment. Before I move into the case study in a moment, I thought I'd provide a little bit of context as to what MTM is actually is. It's also called X-linked myotubular myopathy, sometimes called MTM, sometimes called XL-MTM. It's a rare genetic condition that's caused by a genetic mutation that leads to a lack of or dysfunction of myotubulin protein. This protein is essential to the normal functioning and development of muscle cells. MTM affects boys, and it's characterized by extreme muscle weakness, respiratory failure, and also a high mortality rate. These boys with MTM are wheelchair bound, they have feeding tubes, and most of them don't meet normal physical developmental milestones. They're often hospitalized, mainly because of respiratory complications that are quite dangerous for them. But most importantly, these boys are beautiful, as you could see on the slide. They have engaging personalities, and they truly have the sweetest of demeanors. And it's always an honor to be around them and their families. So let's get into the case study, and I promise I'll be brief. Here's just a brief example of how we at Audentis, with the MTM Clinical Development Program, took what we heard from the patient community and put it into action. We were getting ready for the clinical trial, our phase 1/2 interventional trial for gene therapy for the MTM program. The team had already had extensive input from physicians and healthcare providers and had a pretty good direction on what they were going to measure as far as outcomes. The main outcome measures were related to motor function, and the respiratory outcomes were included, but they were not primary endpoints. However, because this is what Audentis does, before we finalized the protocol, we said, you know what? Let's go talk to the patient community. So the team proceeded to have some focus groups globally, both in the US and in Europe. And there were two key questions that they were trying to get the answers to. What were their biggest worries about their child? What kept them up at night? And what types of changes in a clinical trial would be meaningful to them in their day-to-day lives with their children? While we heard a lot of general concerns that the parents had, and we also heard a lot about motor function, it was the respiratory outcomes that really stood out. Parents wanted their children to get off the ventilator. They wanted them to communicate with them and with others, and they wanted them to have fewer respiratory infections, which are oh so dangerous for these small children. We learned that the ability for a child to generate sound so that they can communicate with their parents is critically important. In fact, they told us that when their child is in distress, it's for the child's safety that the child needs to be able to communicate to the parents that they're in trouble or they're in distress. It's critically important that they could communicate. So what did we do with all of these insights and information? Well, we altered the clinical trial protocol. We added a respiratory measure as a co-primary endpoint. We added more secondary endpoints related to respiratory function, such as time off a ventilator. We also added in assessments to measure swallowing, vocalization, which is what you see this device that's on the slide here in the photo. And we also added in a secretion management scale that's measured not by the healthcare provider, but by the parent, because they're always with the child. And this is just one example of how important it is to learn from the patient community early. And we learned a lot. Partnering early and often is essential to clinical trial design. Every single interaction we have with a patient, a parent, a family member, or a patient leader is an opportunity to learn. Their input can have a huge impact on clinical trial development. We want this input not just one time, not every now and then, but we want it continually, and that's why we're trying to think of new ways like surveys to be able to continually get their input from a broader patient community. Patient experience matters. When we build trust, we learn more. And we don't stop after learning about the disease. We also incorporate their perspective on other key components of the clinical trial, such as language in the ICF or clinical trial travel burden. Our experience in MTM didn't just shape the MTM program. We've actually applied these learnings across all of our development programs. So I'd like to close with a few thoughts. Do not underestimate the importance of learning from patients and families. At Audentist, we don't just listen, we integrate the patient perspective into the fabric of our work. Learning begins early in clinical development, and it should be an ongoing process. It's not a one and done. And lastly, being conscious of the experience that we create for patients and families in every single interaction with them is critical. It's not just what we do, it's how we do it. Thank you for letting me share with you today.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Amy Fisher. I'm one of the patient advocacy leads at Spark Therapeutics. And I think I just want to acknowledge the significant achievement that is at Audentist to be able to really incorporate that feedback from the patient community into clinical trials. I think it's something that we all endeavor for and strive toward, but not something we can always realize. And I really think that you should be quite proud of that achievement. I'm here to share with you some similar perspectives of the way that Spark works with the patient community, particularly around our work towards gene therapy for a specific inherited retinal disease. And I should say I feel a little bit like an imposter because much of the work that I'm going to be describing to you was done before I joined the company. But there's a real silver lining in that patient advocacy was one of the first functions established at Spark Therapeutics, which I think underscores the critical importance of the nature of engagement with the patient community that the company held right from the very beginning, the early tenets of our operations. So, and I also did request specifically that I got to go before Kristen, because I know she's going to crush this much more than I would. So I didn't want to, I'm just setting you up, to end with a grand finale. So I mentioned I am one of the patient advocacy leads. I work on our inherited retinal disease programs as well as some of our central nervous system programs, and a little bit into hemophilia when needed. I feel very fortunate to be at Spark. I'm trained as a genetic counselor, and so being able to do patient advocacy work at a gene therapy company is an extraordinary fit for someone who is passionate and a little bit overly committed to genetics education. So I want to share with you a little bit about the company. So we are a global company based in West Philadelphia with research, development, and manufacturing, and now commercial expertise. We were founded just over 5 years ago using technology and knowledge from over 2 decades, of research that really came out of the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. We are a fully integrated company with functions that range from early research and development through to marketing and commercial expertise. And our founders include scientists and clinicians that have devoted years to the research of gene therapies with the goal of making these investigational one-time treatments a reality. And I think we're all in this room because we are invested in this field, and we remember the hard times and the dark days. And I think it's a real, again, tribute to those that sort of put their heads down and committed themselves to the research, especially when it didn't appear that this was going to be an easy path, certainly. Our vision at Spark is a world where no life is limited by genetic disease. And that's really broad. When we think about genetic disease, it's a huge category. But by thinking about applying a technological platform across therapeutic areas, by doing it with the scientific expertise and the commercial expertise to pull this through and afford new treatment options to patients and families, we really do believe that we can achieve this vision. But I think that Susan's presentation actually underscored a lot of the challenge and what I want to talk to you about today. So much of what you need to do in terms of patient advocacy around gene therapy is not actually around the therapy. It's around the nomenclature, the lexicon, the genetics education, understanding genetic testing. These are all challenges that we've learned firsthand that the patient community and family community needs to come along with us, and it is incumbent upon us as a leader in this space to provide that education in a way that meets the needs expressed by the patient community, even when they may not be entirely clear what those needs are, and they may differ among therapeutic areas. One way, that we achieve this is through, as Kim mentioned, formal meetings, advisory boards with patient community. This illustration is a picture, and again, you see Kristen there, of a group of individuals that were assembled very early on into our inherited retinal disease program across different inherited retinal diseases. So it wasn't just specific to the therapeutic target that we were working on at Spark, but really across the population of folks that were impacted by these diseases. And that was a new challenge, I think, for us. In patient advocacy, our team has, again, decades of experience in rare disease, but we didn't have any experience with a community that didn't necessarily associate with rare disease. And the inherited retinal disease, low vision, and blind community didn't coalesce around the same ideas and activation that the rare disease community did that we were familiar with. And so it was really, again, incumbent upon us to try and figure out how to activate and coalesce the community around this new idea that, in fact, a relatively common diagnosis of Leber congenital amaurosis or retinitis pigmentosa did fit within a rare disease category, and the approach that we were taking to therapy was similar to that seen in other rare diseases. And so it was bringing together the community to really start that discussion. And you'll see represented in this picture individuals who were impacted by the mutation that we were aiming to address, as well as those outside of that particular area. So we were bringing together a geographically and ideologically diverse community to start to try and understand how we could contribute to the dialogue about the advancing of gene therapy treatment. And one particular initiative that came out of that was a website that still lives on successfully called A Shared Vision. I think that tagline was a slam dunk right from the first time it was suggested. But if you visit this site, you'll see that there's information not about treatment. This is a disease awareness effort that was, again, driven by feedback that we received from the community to provide information about gene therapy research, around genetic testing, community stories, which are always so critical. For those of us that were at Global Genes, we heard intimately yesterday the importance of storytelling and how impactful that can be for others that are seeking a landing spot for their challenges and their current situation that they're facing. I think one of the unique things in this particular population is that even if individuals identified with a clinical diagnosis of LCA or RP, there was no identification, as I mentioned already, with a rare disease community, but certainly not with a molecular diagnosis. And we know that there's over 200, more than that, different genes associated with those two clinical diagnoses. And what's challenging about that is that before you can even consider whether a treatment option might be something you'd want to explore, you need to understand the genetic etiology for your particular condition and the knowledge around genetic testing. And I think the mystery that is associated with it was something that we were going to try and tackle with the community to ensure that there was adequate understanding and availability for testing. And so lastly, I just wanted to share with you some of the resources that we built out specific for that. And again, I'm talking about activities that were critical upstream of treatment. Building together a brochure about genetic testing for retinal diseases, building out an animation that talks about gene therapy, and not just about the specific technology, but about the history of the field, building that trust and confidence in all of the work that's been done as we continue to move this forward. And I would say, this certainly isn't an easy task. Building out that education around gene therapy differs depending on the groups. We were fortunate at Spark to be able to bring together a cross-therapeutic area of patient advocacy leaders earlier this year. And we asked point blank, what is your understanding of gene therapy? What are your community's needs? What questions are they asking you? And not only did we get answers all over the board, we got very different answers based on the lived experiences of the respective communities. One community was really around access, and I think it was because that group of conditions was already further along in the path towards a treatment. Others for which treatment was earlier in development were really focused on safety, also because they had had challenges with the safety of particular interventions in their community's history. And then there were other organizations that were representing communities for which no treatment has been available, and they were really like, just give me an option. Give me a clinical trial. Let me see if we can figure this out. We are approaching our risk-benefit analysis in a very different way than other organizations that have had access to different treatments. And so we continue to try and incorporate that feedback in what we do, recognizing that there will be some broad brush approaches that we can take, but also recognizing that we need to address the nuances and the needs of each individual community that we serve. And I can't underscore enough the extreme good fortune that we have had at Spark to work with the likes of Kristen Smedley with just pure engagement and enthusiasm around what we're doing and really propelling the community to understand more around genetic testing and the importance of considering new developments for treatment. Whether or not that might be right for an individual family is an entirely different story that I think I'll let her tell you. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Nope. There we go. Okay, so my disclaimer is that yes, I launched and run the Curing Retinal Blindness Foundation, but I am an elementary school teacher by lifetime preparation. So you're going to see some really different visuals up here than probably what you've seen in a long time in your field. Can I just tell you I have musicians in my house, and that is like, I'm like, that is just my life. There's always music, and so it's like we planned that. Thank you for that. Gets me going, too, with a nice, my son's at college. That is hilarious. I dropped my oldest son off at college a month ago, and he's my big-time musician, so it's been very quiet around me, so that's like Michael is, talking to me. So I am Kristen Smedley, and I have to say, if you knew my life the past couple of months, it's like a Netflix show going on that they should just follow me around. So the fact that I'm able to be here, and all it took for me to get here is it's one of those moments of I'm listening and watching these presentations, and it's really amazing. And my journey, that keeps happening to me. I'm very blessed with being put in places and people in this journey that really have there's no rhyme or reason for it, other than something else happening here. And I just want to acknowledge, so I don't forget, because I have such ADD, I have all these things to make me remember stuff. In one of the presentations, it talked about fixing the disease. And I can't tell you how much I honor that phrase and not fixing the patient, and you'll see why. So if that can just stay as a theme in the back of your mind while you're working, it's really an incredible thing. So this is what I run everything on, everything I do in my life. This is a quote from Helen Keller: "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." I was raised that way. I don't know if it's because I have such a sports background too, that I'm used to being on a team and being part of a team and doing my work for the team and relying on team members. But this is really the through line of all the work I do. And it's interesting how Helen Keller became important to us too. All right, what am I doing here? So this is my little family. My on the, I guess your far left is my oldest, Michael, that I said I just dropped off at college in Nashville. Thank you very much. We are in Philly, and the kid decided to go all the way to Nashville just to make me crazy, I think. Next to him is my daughter, who is sighted, Carissa, and she's 14 now. And I was joking yesterday, somebody in the presentation before me said that she had spontaneous triplets. Well, my Mitchell on the end there is like having spontaneous triplets. He's my active one that is now 15 and a sophomore. Michael and Mitchell both have a rare eye disease, CRB1 LCA. So CRB1 LCA, just real quick, I call it the 1-2 punch to the retina. It affects the rods and the cones. In our foundation for CRB1, there are RP and LCA. So there's the later onset, later being like 10, 11, 12. And my guys were from birth. So the CRB1 kids are Braille readers and white cane users. And eventually by 20s or 30s, all vision is expected to degenerate. We're working on a natural history study right now so I can pinpoint a little more of that info. That's just some quick background. This is just a fraction of my team. Our team right now is, the board of directors anyway, that's guiding this foundation, is all affected parents. And before anybody has a groan about that it doesn't necessarily should be built that way, we built it that way to launch really big, really quick, and it worked for us. We're going to branch out now and put in some advisory pieces. We have a scientific advisory board, but we are going to put in some professional advisory because none of us were trained for any of this. Although the guy in the middle there is a sibling of a CRB1 kiddo, and he went to Temple and was working with marketing and all that. So I was like making him our social media guy, and all that. I kind of like am steering everybody's kids' careers around the work we have to do. But they are a stellar team that dedicates as volunteers so much time and effort to this. But like I said, we don't have all the professionals working on this. However, we built from 10 families through Facebook 7 years ago in the United States to a global presence now. I remember this is like a third grade teachers kind of thing, right? And it works good on social media too, to have the little hearts and all that, right? I might have to switch to smiley emojis or something soon. But I actually just met our family from Australia, came to Philly to see a doctor at CHOP, and we met for a little while and talked about now launching a good Australian presence to up these numbers and impact more CRB1 families. So we're getting there. And like I said, teamwork is what I'm all about because I just can't get there fast enough by myself. We have little street cred here. We are Foundation Alliance members at Global Genes. I was thrilled to see Nicole's name on the board there. And we are a member of NORD, and I'm actually the Pennsylvania ambassador for NORD. And interestingly, they still haven't given me a sash. I really think that the ambassador should have a sash, right? I'm campaigning for that at the summit next week. So this is my son, Michael, who just graduated high school, like I said. And if you see, he was the graduation speaker at a school where in his class, there were over 600 kids. The school is that big. And if you see around his neck, I don't know if you have recent graduates, but they have these cords now of all of the achievements. So I don't even know how many cords he had. It got ridiculous. I thought he was going to be like hunched over, right? He had a medal for one of the big achievements that he did, and he had a stole he was on student council exec board his entire 4 years that he was there. But there's two reasons I wanted to put this slide in there for you to have in the back of your mind as you work. Michael was expected at the kindergarten IEP meeting, the individualized education plan meeting, he was expected to achieve at 70%. They said that if he achieved at 70%, that was like 100% for a sighted kid. And that didn't work well for our family. So we have been working to change that perception of what a blind person can do since he was in kindergarten. And when he got to, I actually have a slide for a different presentation where it's him at the mailbox in kindergarten, first day of school, with his little bus tag, expected to achieve at 70%. And then him at the mailbox, he was like, are you kidding me? Standing in that gown at my mailbox, right, with all those cords around him. And that's a testament to the work that we're doing, that I have to empower these families with the tools that these kids need to be successful and change what's happening in the blind community. And then we have folks like Spark and everybody else working on giving them options. And I say the options for the convenience of sight, because I see it as a convenience, not something that they have to have. Come on now. So that's one of the reasons that we partnered with Spark in so much that they're doing, because I do believe that all patients, and I'll just talk about blind people for now, but all blind people, in my opinion, deserve an option for sight. And it is up to them if they want to take that option or not. And I'll go into a little bit more about what I really see my role, my organization's role is in that concept. And it's probably still a legendary day at Spark on the calendar when they, God help them, invited me to come to their office in Philly. And they're probably like, oh, dear God, this woman lives in Philly. She's going to stalk us, in the city. And she's around I am around every corner. I actually was around the corner in D.C. one day, and Jeff and them were like, whoa, she really is around every corner. But they brought me in to say, what are you doing? Where do you see this going? Where can we focus? And I kind of did like a Kristen Smedley Has a Dream speech and laid it all out there. But my number one thing was, there was two things. The biggest thing was respect. That was the message that was missing in all of the work for treatments for the blind. There wasn't a message of respect, and the blind community was getting frustrated, annoyed, and that's why everybody was so siloed. Blind people aren't broken, so they don't need to be fixed. However, a lot of blind people would enjoy the convenience of sight. And I can tell you this, with my two boys with the exact same disease, the exact same mutation, they are completely different. And right now, my Michael, my older one, has said, if a treatment was available right now, no thank you. And that's hard to hear with all the work that's going into this and all the time I've dedicated my life to this. But as a mom, I've done my job. Right? He is so confident and comfortable in his own skin that would be hard for him to switch. So he has said, because he knows a lot of people have dedicated their lives to this. So, of course, being, the firstborn and the charming and keeping everybody happy, it might be codependent, I'm not sure yet. But he says, let me go do college. I'm going to do college as I've always done everything. And then when I come back, if there's something available, I'll take a look and maybe. Now that, it is wonderful as a mom to hear that. But I got to tell you, I got to keep it real. My Mitch is like, is that going to make my life easier and I would have not to have to work so hard at some things? Sign me up. I'm in. Keep working, Mom. They're very different. They're very different. So that was the message that I wanted out there, was that please respect that this is an option we are looking for, not that they're broken and need to be fixed, which is why I really appreciated that statement of fix the disease and not my guys. So that they did, and they brought this community. Spark worked, you saw that picture with the small committee, plus all the other stuff that they've done to make this really a community now where the folks that were siloed saying, we don't want to hear about a fix, now are saying, they're interested. They're interested because of some of these things. So I was actually at the Nord Summit a couple years ago, and there was a mom talking about the Awareness Day in her state and all this stuff to get the Awareness Day in her state. And I'm like, and all the benefits of that. And everybody's cheering, and this is wonderful, right? And I'm the goofball sitting there going, oh my God, there's 50 states. I am one person, and my laundry pile is this big. Like, how am I going to 50 states? Our team isn't that big. So I went, Mike Fitzpatrick in Pennsylvania, where I'm at, was congressman at that time, and I knew one of his staffers pretty well through a whole different reason. And we were having coffee one day, and I was like, tell me how I'm supposed to get a team with 50 states, awareness days, and because I don't do anything small, of course. So she said, let's do a national one. And I'm like, how do you do a national one? So we went, simply enough, long story short, we did it was a House Resolution 625 that named February 28th as Rare Eye Disease Day. But the way that we did it was not just for treatments. And Spark was involved. We all went down to the Lincoln Room and had this big reception and everything. It wasn't just about treatments. It's about genetic testing, and I'll talk about the importance of that in the entire community in a minute. But it was about resources for the blind. It was several different things that was addressing the entire community's needs, not just research towards a treatment. And what ended up happening was, because we delivered that message to the congressman so well, they submitted it in Braille to really drive the point home that this is important. And interestingly enough, this actually annoyed me when I started to think about it. It's the first time in U.S. history that legislation was submitted in Braille. Weird, right? For all these years. So it just went berserk in the community, that the PR that came out of that was unbelievable. But that's what started the siloed groups that didn't want to talk to us, saying, wait a minute, maybe this is something that we can all work on together. It was really beautiful. And Jeff and a few others are in that picture there that's awfully blurry and ridiculous. Okay, so Amy also mentioned the Shared Vision website, but the reason I wanted to highlight it was specifically the patient stories, because the patient stories on there, somebody told me years ago when I started, one of my very best friends said to me, Kristen, you're never going to raise any money because you're too happy. People only give money to the people that are pathetic and have like the violins playing, and the angels singing behind them, and I'm like, I'm Don't Stop Believing is my ringtone on my phone, right? I'm always a party. So she's like, you're just too happy. And I said, I'm not going about this in a way that's pathetic. That's not how my life is. That's not how my boys are. That's not honoring them. And when I asked Spark to just make sure they're always honoring all the different types of patients and do this in a way that isn't pathetic and sad. And if you look at these stories, it is phenomenal. I mean, these are the two blind brothers. If you've seen them on Ellen, they have the clothing line that raises money for Foundation Fighting Blindness, and they are hilarious. I mean, their story is phenomenal. So it's that kind of thing. Yes, there are some heartstring stories, because some families, that's how they roll. That's how they tell their story, pulling at heartstrings, because it is a tough story to tell, but it's all of it. They put in every single voice. So I encourage you to check those out. And if you're working with a group, do the same thing. have all the different voices from the community. Dan will freak out if he knows I have his face up there. He's so humble and shy. It's like I just put him on the whole slide. So I didn't have a picture of the mobility course that we helped with. So I figured, let's just put Dr. Dan up there all by himself. But Dan Chung was working years ago on the mobility course. So my point is the end point. What is the treatment going to do for this patient? For me, the mobility course made so much more sense. It was navigating before treatment and then after treatment. And we sent a bunch of our patients, our CRB1 patients, even though this isn't the disease that they're working on, to that mobility course to give them the information that they needed for what is it like to have this disease and navigate this obstacle course. And interestingly enough, my kids ended up loving spending the day with Dr. Dan and doing this obstacle course for an entire day. And it was levels of light. It started out bright and then went all the way dim, so they could really assess where the disease was hitting and where the intervention would help. So we made sure, I forgot to say in Michael's speech, he had said at graduation, put people on your team that you need their help to succeed, but also go and look and see whose team you can be on. And this was a time that we could actually contribute to the work that Spark was doing in a very meaningful way, and send patients to their mobility course. And then we also, Amy highlighted the brochure that we were a part of helping put together for genetic testing. Now, the reason I wanted to reiterate this is because I have a whole different perspective on this particular thing that Spark is working on. So most people, probably almost everybody in this room, you hear advocacy for genetic testing. It's because, for the most part, we want to find, figure out all the genes, get all those mutations documented, and then see who fits in what, where, and then get the treatment for them, right? I have a whole different perspective on this because most of the community and the blind community that does not want to hear about a treatment said, I don't need genetic testing. I'm not looking for a treatment, so I'm not going. What we found, though, was I'm getting phone calls from a bunch of parents of blind children that don't have, this is going to sound ridiculous, but just bear with me because it's the way this country is right now and I'm working on it. If they don't have a specific mutation, a specific disease diagnosis, they're not getting Braille in their schools, they're not getting the mobility instruction in these schools, and I lost my mind. I have had temper tantrums all over the place with this journey, but that one was the biggest one, that you need a specific code, and I can cry and scream and yell about that all I want, and it's going to fall on deaf ears probably. This is a solution. Having that genetic test that says this is CRB1, LCA, this is a degenerative disease, you need to provide Braille. So it's a whole different, so I encourage you, the communities you're working in, look and see if there are other benefits that something as simple as a genetic test can change the life of a person not even getting to a treatment. So the other thing that the byproduct of Spark getting keeping respect in the community, making it a true community of people wanting to work together, people have started coming together. I mean, this is just last June. The choroideremia group, I'm a CRB1 LCA, and I'm the keynote. They never had anybody outside of choroideremia keynoting at their big convention. But we've become such a community of exchanging resources. And I have such a message of, the choroideremia folks, they're older when they're impacted. And there's a lot of sadness, a lot of devastation there. And I'm the one saying, but if we get the tools, and you can still thrive. So it was fantastic. And that's Jamie from Spark that was in the picture, and she was a part of the whole convention too. It was fantastic. But those are the kinds of things that are happening now. The community's coming together. And of course, one of the greatest moments of my entire journey was our entire IRD community coming together to testify. And I say testify, at the FDA. I mean, there's, testify, but it was more like testify, to the fact that this work is changing lives. And it's interesting to watch, you watch those slides of the FDA. I mean, the science, I love you all working on the science, but the science looked like hell. I mean, it was not compelling. Just a little fraction here and a little fraction there. But when everybody stands up and tells the story of that little fraction, that little percent, meant Christian went from Braille to reading his speech on that paper. And it was only bolded because they didn't know what the light was going to be like. It was not large print. So that little fraction in the science made that difference that makes he can go into a restaurant and read a menu. He can read a speech. He can read the sheet music because he was on America's Got Talent and was Howie Mandel's Golden Buzzer guy. And he can read the sheet music of all the stuff that he's doing now. I mean, it's a fraction that makes a huge impact. So in closing, I'm going to land the plane here, finally. It's also about perception. So you might look at this picture and think this is a beautiful family vacation photo where the family's out watching a lovely sunset on a beautiful body of water. In the rare eye disease community, this is a nightmare. This is what's happening. When we're given that diagnosis of a rare eye disease, we are literally set out on the water, no resources in sight, and the darkness is coming. And it's still happening. I am still getting calls that that's how the diagnosis was delivered. So, then there's folks like Spark and all the companies that you work for and the organizations that you work for that are the light, that are the direction for us to go, work towards with that diagnosis. But in the meantime, my role, and Spark has joined me in this role, and a lot of other folks are joining me in this role, is the bridge. This is the bridge. This is actually one of the bridges in Philly. My role is to be the bridge from diagnosis to treatment and bring the families across with all the tools and resources that they need so that when they get to the other side of that bridge, I want them to have a hard choice of whether they're going to take that treatment option that's available or not. But every single one of those inherited retinal diseases, all 270, whatever there is now, deserves that option. And then, if everybody does that, works together, walk on the bridge together, then ultimately, we don't stop until all 7,000 rare diseases and all the conditions that people are living with hit FDA approval. It's not a tall order, huh? And then I had to put this at the end because you got to celebrate. I mean, we did all that work and did all the, the FDA came right at Christmas time. I knew it was going to land that way. The FDA approval, right, for Luxturna. And then we get to it was incredible. I was asked to present the Innovation Award from NORD to Jeff that night. And my Michael was the headline music entertainment that night. And he sang Changing What It Means to Be Blind. And it was that is exactly what has been happening. We literally are changing what it means to be blind, changing what a blindness diagnosis can mean in a family. And for that, I am so grateful that my head's about to explode. It's an honor to be sitting here amongst people that are dedicating their lives to making other people's lives better. Because when I initially started this 18 years ago at this journey, it wasn't pretty. I was on my couch crying, and now I get to be everywhere that I possibly can saying great things are happening. And it's because of all the work that you all do. So thank you very much for that.
Hi, I'm Jen Farmer from the Friedrich's Ataxia Research Alliance, and I'm going to give the final talk, but I think before I get to that, I'd really like to just give a minute for some questions to our panelists, because this is a great opportunity for you to learn from folks who are doing the work with the patient community. And so, is there anybody with questions? If not, I've got a few. I have questions. At FARA, we don't have clinical trials right now in gene therapy, but we're in the process of working with companies that are developing gene therapy for FA, but we're still a little ways off, so we're kind of at the beginning of the road. And so I have questions. If you don't, that I'll ask. Please share your experiences and maybe provide some advice for companies that are early in development, so preclinical, even research, still figuring out what the product profile would look like, and
Yeah, just kind of just guideposts, because I hear cautionary tales about early engagement and how much hope you can provide without being misleading, and engaging with affected families who may not benefit from a future therapy. It's just, I mean, it's a general vague question, but.
I have a question next.
The only thing I would say is well, not the only thing. The one thing that I'll say right now is to engage the community early for how you're going to design this in the end. What is the end going to look like? Because for the blind community, for the RP65, initially, it was obviously, what do you think of when you think did an intervention work? The vision chart. And that wasn't meaningful. The obstacle course was meaningful, because for me, that would slow my boys down to have to read print at this point. That wasn't meaningful to the community. It was being able to navigate was more meaningful. So I would say just something early on, ask what is meaningful. Just like the respiratory stuff. What's meaningful to them?
The only thing that I would add to that is instead of reaching out to individual patients or families, if there is a patient advocacy organization in the regions you're looking at, definitely reach out to them first. And I think you're 100% right. You need to be careful not to get people's hopes up or raise unrealistic expectations. But I think if you're dealing with a patient advocacy organization that's professional and you're transparent with them about what you're trying to do some early analysis, get to know what the unmet need is. I think sometimes you need to answer the question, is there an unmet need? Because sometimes in a laboratory we might come up with, wow, this will work for this genetic disorder. Well, yeah, but do you really need it? Those are just my 2 cents.
And I would just say, you mentioned cautionary tales about early engagement, right? You go to a patient meeting generally, and the feedback is involve us early, involve us often. And on the flip side, your legal and regulatory teams might be saying, no, because we're afraid. We're afraid of the risk that takes. And I would just say, if you are going to have a difficult conversation down the road, you're going to be in a much better position if you have a solid foundation and you've had the difficult conversations to manage expectations earlier. So as long as you are forthright around where you are in development, what challenges and questions you still need to answer, and what your potential outcome may be, making sure that you are not elevating hopes in a way that you can't deliver on, then when things do go sideways, because they do most of the time, you're in a much better position to have that conversation because you've already built that relationship on a solid foundation of trust.
Can I add one thing to that really quickly? If things don't work out, say you find out you're not going to proceed with the program, but you've already reached out to patient groups, don't just disappear and ghost them. I've seen that happen sometimes. Have as honest of a conversation as you can with them, and if there's questions you can't answer, say you can't answer them and why, but just don't ghost them, because that's just ruins it for so many other companies and relationships.
Well, and maybe just to build on that, if something has gone sideways in the program, there's a chance that even if you decide this is it for us, this is a stopping point, communicating that helps the field learn, and that patient advocacy group can take that forward and hopefully not have that mistake made again, or, go through that process again. And I think that's, the early engagement piece, that's something Farah says all the time, that we want to be engaged early, we want to be working with companies early, but it's partially a big part my job to help manage those early expectations, and that's where that partnership happens. I'm not going to bring a family in telling them, oh, this gene therapy company, and this is an early discovery project, but they want to understand the disease so that they can think about how to develop a therapy that's going to be meaningful, and we're years away. Setting expectations is a large part of what the advocacy group can do and help you manage if they're a good one.
So I have a question regarding sort of patient advocacy in helping to design natural history studies. And I think that this is an area where individual companies who are going after the same target really need to come together to share the data around natural history studies, given the limited patient population. Can anyone sort of speak to that and just comment on that?
I mean, I agree with you, and it's an ongoing challenge. In fact, this week, many of us are also down at the Global Genes meeting, which is the patient advocacy meeting in Irvine, and are sitting in on sessions trying to solve exactly that. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that at least at the companies, we're hearing that message loud and clear and trying to figure out how to work with the patient groups.
And I would say that challenge actually extends beyond just natural history studies. I think when you're dealing with a rare disease and there are a limited number of patients that may be interested in a natural history study, a clinical trial, or even just providing feedback to the companies, you're running up against those same issues. And I know Eurordis has been working very hard to put together what they call a community advisory board program, where they're trying to establish a group of individuals that represent a certain patient population that then companies can access with the questions that we have, rather than each individual company hosting their own advisory board and repeatedly asking perhaps similar questions. But it is, it's an ongoing challenge in the field.
So just a quick follow-up to a comment you made about regulatory and legal and their concerns, because it is a true concern, you know, not to cross that imaginally, you know, line of you're recruiting patients and all of that. How do you handle this? How do you make sure that you're not crossing that line, even if it's perception?
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, the lines and the rules and the regulations are here for very good reason. They're here to ensure patient safety is paramount. And I think, at least in our work, our most critical partners in everything that we do are our legal and compliance and regulatory colleagues. And I think it's, and I don't say that in a facetious way. I mean, I work exceedingly closely with my business partners in those functions, and it's a two-way conversation. And I think that that's something you need to instill right from the very beginning of your relationship with those colleagues is you're there to provide, to champion the patient experience so that they can understand what it is that we have the good fortune to be out at these patient meetings and learning and understanding what those needs are and then interpreting that and championing that back to them. They have, you know, their guideposts around what we can do, and it's really about having the conversation that gets you to an answer that achieves mutual objectives rather than no, you can't. Yeah, and I think that that's really where we start all of our conversations at Spark is here's what the ask is, here's what the community has expressed they have a need for, here's what we're up against, how do we get through this? And if we can't, again, it underscores the importance of having a patient advocacy function to have that conversation around how to manage expectations about what we can and can't do and why. It's not easy, though. Not always quick. Certainly.
So I think we've only got 5 minutes,
Oh, no.
and so with that, I think that's right.
Yeah.
I'm going to just take a few minutes and maybe give you an idea for a starting place for, you know, when you're working in a disease area and needing to think about patient engagement and working with advocacy community, this might be one place to start. And so externally led patient-focused drug development meetings are kind of something, it's a new option for us, and it's a way to really get at what I think our panelists were talking about related to the patient voice, bringing it forward for all stakeholders, and thinking about what's clinically meaningful. And when you get to things like natural history studies and having to design them, at least my experience with the natural history study in our disease was it was the clinicians figured out, you know, what the measures were that were going to be in the natural history study. And yes, the clinicians have experience with patients, but they took a very medical research approach to it and not really a patient-centered approach, and where we're finding ourselves now is having to go back and reincorporate some of that. There are great outcome measures, but FDA is saying to us, are they clinically relevant? Are they important to patients? And so this is a way to really start a program from a patient-centered approach, educate regulators, and give yourselves and your community a real voice. And these come from, these patient-focused drug development meetings come out of PDUFA 5, and in the interest of time, I won't give you all the background, but FDA actually held about 20 of these meetings that really set the framework, then realized we can't host these meetings for every disease, but they were extremely valuable. And so now they welcome any disease advocacy group to form their own patient-focused drug development meeting and participate. What they are not. These are not FDA sponsored. These are not FDA endorsed. They're not part of the public record. But at the end, you do have a written summary that does get submitted to FDA. And so the meeting does have a way, and the outcomes from the meetings do have a way to live on. They are advocacy organization led. Wilson Bryan actually gave the opening remarks at our meeting and talked about being a neurologist treating FA patients, which was hugely valuable for our community to hear that the director of the Gene and Cell Therapy division at FDA knows what Friedreich's ataxia is. It's so exciting for everyone. And again, this engages all the stakeholders. The aims of the meeting are really to understand the experience living with the condition and to really start to focus the conversation for everyone around what's going to be clinically relevant. And that's what FDA needs. They need our help in understanding that and making sure that the endpoints that are being proposed or the significance of the change that's experienced with the therapy is meaningful to patients, or that the risk-benefit calculation, is favorable for the patients. And they can't do that if they don't really understand the journey of the disease and the patient's perspectives. So what do these meetings look like? We had about 8 patients give testimony. We had real data collection ongoing during the meeting, so live surveys. Everybody in the room was responding on their cell phone. We also had it so that people who could not make the meeting were responding from home. And so, it's a huge undertaking, but, a few key things are just really put the time and effort in to be inclusive, get people at all stages of disease. And, that's what makes this a robust experience. And it's the patient experience and the caregiver experience in some diseases. And it's important to sometimes include both depending on the disease space in which you're working with, which we had to do. The other thing is you need a lot of participants. For this to really be effective, you need the patient. You need a good representation of patients so that you get out of it what's needed. And so we had at our meeting over 200 people in the room, but we also had a lot of people online and responding to the surveys. We had 130 to 150 people responding to each of the survey questions. And so you start to feel more confidence in what you're learning because there's good representation from the community. Let's see, and just to quickly finish up, let's see. So I thought this was illustrative of one of the points that were mentioned earlier, but in the case of Friedreich's ataxia, it's a multi-system disease, but the neurologic features are the ones that present first and the ones that are most visible and the ones that everybody thinks about. And so not surprising, everyone answered, that they have the neurologic symptoms, but fatigue was a symptom reported by all patients, more so than they recognize their fatigue more than some of their neurologic complications of the disease. Yet it's something we don't collect in our natural history study. And when you ask people what most impacts their daily life, fatigue is just as important as their neurologic symptoms. And when you ask them what they're worried about in the future, right, other symptoms start to emerge. And so there's lots of good conversation that happened, a lot of good things that we learned through this. But while, I think I was thinking about Kristen's presentation when she was talking about it's not always what you think needs to be fixed. If you look at our natural history study, you look at the scales that we developed, you'd think it's balance and coordination that needs to be fixed. Patients have told us, I can live life from this wheelchair as long as I don't die of heart disease, and as long as I have enough energy to do the things I want to do in a day, or I don't lose my speech and things that I need to communicate with other people. And so it's not always what maybe is obvious or that we perceive is going to be important. And that's what you can really learn from these meetings and will help you have a much more robust program and deliver therapies that are meaningful to patients. And at the end, you put together a full report. All the testimony, all the data, everything gets put in the report and submitted to FDA. And in our case, we had great collaboration with other patient groups, helping us support the meeting, participate in the meeting. So it's, sometimes when we're fractured or peer fractured and splintered among patient advocacy groups, sometimes you can help the patient advocacy community come together to do something like this, because you only get one shot. You can't do this meeting 10 times with each advocacy group. And so I'll leave it here because I know we're done on time. But thank you for your participation this morning, and we're all here if you have further questions.